It's real simple. Art is simply the expression of the human experience in whatever form it takes. Graffiti, I don't like it, you don't like it, it's art. The way a person slam dunks a basketball and, the gyrate, that's art. Everything we do is an expression of our experience.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 383 of F-Stop, Collaborate and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I sat down and had a chat with Pacific Northwest photographer Bruce Heinemann. Bruce has been in the nature photography game for a very long time and brings with him a lot of wisdom and perspective, as well as some interesting takes on art and photography. I think listeners will enjoy his words and come to find some inspiration in what we discuss. Before jumping in, I wanted to quickly thank our latest supporters on Patreon and PayPal. Thank you to Beth Miller-Herholtz, Pat Knotts, and Madeline Gallagher. These three awesome people heeded my call for financial support, and it is quite appreciated. Your support on Patreon is the only financial support that this project receives, and without it, I would not be able to make the podcast week after week since 2017. So thank you, and cheers. Okay, let's get to this week's conversation with Bruce Heinemann.
All right, Bruce Heinemann, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Matt, for having me. And if I can just throw this out to you right off the bat, I'd like to say on behalf of your audience and your other photographers, what an incredible service you provide to the world of photography. You bring us together and you expose photographers to the world that we might not otherwise know. And you've created a great community and network. So personally, I'm indebted, and I'm sure everybody else feels the same way. So thank you for what you do, because it's a tremendous service.
Wow, thank you, Bruce. And I didn't even have to pay you to say all those things.
It's very nice. And, I'm a consummate salesman, so I know you start off with the good right off the bat. But I'm completely sincere. And just quickly, what really prompted that was a podcast you did with the Australian aerial photographer. Her work just absolutely blew me away. And I thought, if Matt hadn't interviewed her, I would probably never have found her. And I was so inspired by her work and other photographers. And so anyway, that's what prompted that is your work is incredibly important.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate that, Bruce. And it was funny, I was trying to send you an email a couple of days ago. And so I had to search my Gmail for your name, and I realized that the first time that we had corresponded with each other was all the way back in 2018. You reached out to me through my website. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I emailed you about, you were doing articles on night photography and double exposures and, the reality of that. And so, as in all things digital photography, all the things we can do and should we do it and all that sort of thing.
Yes. All of the things that I've gotten in trouble for over the years. Well, Bruce, for people who aren't familiar with you and what you do, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I live in Anacortes, Washington, which is the jump-off point for the Washington State ferries to the other San Juan Islands. I'm from Seattle. I have 2 kids and grandkids, and I have done photography for 45 years now, and probably of the most interest to other photographers. I got really lucky. I started out doing corporate calendars right off the bat, and that's provided me the foundation for a profession. And I know it's really difficult nowadays because there's so many good photographers to do it professionally. And everybody has to be really creative to figure out a way to monetize our work and, be who we are as artists. So So those were my beginnings, and then corporate calendars, and then I started doing coffee table books and that. And for a while, I've been a trumpet player all my life, and for a period of time in the '90s, I was playing solo with small ensembles with my images projected on stage. So I have a music background that I weave into what I talk about photography, because music and photography are very closely related in a lot of ways. So
It's funny, and I know I'm overgeneralizing a little bit, but for people who are maybe like in their 20s and 30s, maybe even in their 40s, if they weren't in full-time photography back in the 80s and 90s, they might not realize that literally for some people, if you had a large body of work that was even halfway decent, you could throw it into calendars, you could put it on stock agency sites, and you could make, I mean, a very, very substantial amount of money because there wasn't that many people doing it. And, the bar for entry was pretty high. Getting into film photography was a much higher bar of entry, and like the learning curve was steeper and all of those things. So it's interesting how disruptive digital photography has been on the market of photography, and how to monetize it long term.
well, let me jump in on that. So yeah, stock photography for me, like a lot of people, was very lucrative. Me, actually, it didn't get lucrative until Photodisc came into existence, and then Getty bought them out and pretty much destroyed stock photography. But I did well while it was Photodisc in the early days of Getty. When I speak to photographers at camera clubs or other things, and people ask me about getting into it, what I say to them is, in my career, I succeeded because I have no competition. And by that, I don't mean I'm better than everybody or anybody else. Is that I have a niche that few, if any, not occupy. And that was corporate calendars. And that led into books and then multimedia shows. So anyway, what I would tell aspiring photographers now is the same thing, is create your own niche. That which certainly includes your own style, your own discernible style. One of the funniest things that ever happened to me, I did a book published by Book of the Month Club. It was called A Guide to Photographing the Art of Nature. And it was based on my first coffee table book called The Art of Nature, Reflections on the Grand Design. So it did really well. It was kind of a how-to. Anyway, so I'm in the North Cascades photographing on the Mountain Loop Highway in early November, and I'm standing alongside the road photographing this grouping of alder trees, and it's just beautiful. And then I hear this rumbling, and this truck with no mufflers coming up the road, and it slows down and stops right behind me, and it's this guy that's looks like a bear, all beard and hair and flannel shit, and it just scared the hell out of me. He takes a look at me, and he looks at the trees, and then he takes off. Okay, so I finish shooting, and I get back in my van, and I'm just ready to go, and I hear the truck come back up the road. He pulls up alongside me, and I thought, oh God, I'm in his territory. So I roll down the window, and he looks at me and says, "You're Bruce Heinemann, aren't you?" Oh, whoa. And I said, "Yeah, how'd you?" And he says, "I have your book, A Guide to Photographing the Art of Nature." And when I went by, I could see that that's the kind of picture you'd take. Same thing happened in Death Valley. I walked up on a dune, and there was a photographer. So anyway, style is something that we develop, and when we really get firm in our photography, our style will emerge quite naturally.
Well, how long did that take for you? Because you said 45 years. How many of those 45 years did it take you to figure that out?
Well, I'll say this: I didn't get serious photography until the mid to late '80s, and by that time I was doing a lot of shooting, and because I was doing a lot of shooting, like all things, when you really get involved and put your effort into it, you really develop. So late 80s, early 90s, I could see my style emerging, and it was all I did grand scenics, but really I was mostly more into the what we call the intimate landscape. But a lot
Sure.
of intimate landscapes for me were kind of mid distance. Like the example of the trees I was shooting when that guy came by, the trees were maybe 20, 30 feet away. So it wasn't right up close, but so
Yeah.
so that's how my style developed. And I like to say, if you want to know if you have a style, take like 20 photographers and have them put 10 of their best, most representational prints of theirs in a box and mix them all up and have people who are familiar with all those photographers go through all of those prints and pick out each photographer's prints and put them in a pile. You can pretty much, with exceptions, but pretty much you'll get people's pictures in the right pile because they have a discernible style, and that's when you have a style, is when people recognize it without prompting.
There you go. That's the life goal right there.
Yeah, well, it's like this: when you hear Elton John, you know it's him. When you hear
Right.
when you hear Pavarotti, the minute he opens his mouth, that first note that comes out, that's Pavarotti. So it's style is immediately discernible.
Makes sense. All right. Well, before we get into the really deep conversation that we're going to have about art, I wanted to ask you real quick about a music video that you helped create back in 1997 that was narrated by Tom Skerritt. What was that about?
Okay, so my first book was called The Art of Nature: Reflections on the Grand Design, 1992, and it was my very first book. And actually, that was the basis for the next book, A Guide to Photographing the Art of Nature. I basically took the Art of Nature book and I did a how-to based on all the images in that book. So, so anyway, long story short, did the book came out. Uh, I was at a fundraiser for the timber communities in 1993. I was Clinton had gotten elected, and they were starting to really clamp down on the cut and run timber practices. So we all in the arts community wanted to help the timber communities in this transition. So we were doing a fundraiser in the home of this fundraiser leader. I saw a picture of her and her husband with Tom Skerritt, and they all had a glass of wine. And I said, "Oh, you know Tom Skerritt? Yeah, blah, blah, blah." I said, "If I give you a book, would you give it to him?" So I signed a copy, gave it to her. And about a week later, I got a phone call, and it was Tom. And we had a delightful hour-long conversation. And I've known him through the years, and he's incredibly gracious, humble, supportive of other artists. So anyway, about a year later, I'm associated with a guy who had a film production company who did music videos, and I said, "Let's do a music video based on the book." So he said, "Great." And I got Tim McNulty, who's the author of the 3 essays in the book, to adapt them for narration. And I called Tom up and I said, "Would you be interested?" And he said, "Sure." He did it for free. He showed up on a cold, wet January day, sick as a dog, could hardly speak. So my friend, the cinematographer, his wife was there, loaded him up with some hot tea and lemon, and by golly, in a half hour, he was ready to go, and he knocked that narration out. Boom, just start to finish, one take. Anyway, put it together. I had a friend who was a musician that I played with, and we put together a really good soundtrack. I guess you call it new age. It wasn't woo woo. It was really well done. Anyway, we sent it into Houston Film Fest '97, and it won Gold Award for that category, and then got it syndicated to about 140 PBS stations for broadcast. So
That's
so anyway,
awesome.
that's how that happened. Tom actually took a copy of the book to the White House and gave it to the Clintons at a visit. So anyway, Tom's an incredibly wonderful person, and he moved to Seattle because he didn't like the Hollywood scene anymore.
Yeah, and for people who don't know who Tom Skerritt is, if you've seen Top Gun, the original Top Gun, he plays Viper.
Yeah. Well, the first time I ever saw him was the original movie MASH.
There you go.
If you haven't seen the original movie, you should see it. It's hilarious. So that's how that started.
I love that. Well, Bruce, I'm gonna hit you with a really out there question. What is art?
You know, it's real simple. Art is simply the expression of the human experience in whatever form it takes. Graffiti, I don't like it, you don't like it, it's art. The way a person slam dunks a basketball and, the gyrate, that's art. Everything we do is an expression of our experience. And to me, that's what art is. I think I've read all these definitions of art, what's this and it's that, and I think, is that really useful? I mean, to kind of slice and dice and parse and, oh, well, this is art and this isn't art and blah, 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 blah. Why not just go with a very fundamental definition that art's an expression of our human experience? And then you can talk about particular categories, whether it's music, whether it's the written word or, performative art, whatever it is. But I think, frankly, it's a waste of time to keep beating this subject to death, parse it, and there's some incredible photographers and writers who speak to this. But at some point, I say, let's move on. What I want to talk about is the spiritual component of photography, because that's what all art and all life is about.
Let's do it.
Is that so? It does express itself through our art, and through that, Jackson Pollock said, let's see, he said, painting is self-discovery. Every good artist paints what he is. And I think that pretty much says it all right there. So to me, that's art. That's how I approach it. I think what I try to instill in implore, and particularly in my recent workshops and private one-on-one, is a photographer needs to understand, particularly fine art, landscape, that we're artists, okay? We're artists. Where a painter has a canvas and brushes, and he or she uses the brush, we have the tools of Photoshop and Lightroom. We have the ability, though an artist starts from scratch and we start with what exists, we have all of these wonderful tools to present the image and to render it in a final form that is a work of art of our own making. And so, implore people, think of your work as a work of art. And when you like I do a lot, lasso and zoom in on a part of the picture and bring out the shadows a little bit, or I adjust highlights in a particular area and I tweak it here and do this and clone out bright spots and clean up all the edges. That's all part of creating your painting. And as I have a relative to composition, I say in composition, everything matters. Every square, every pixel matters. And it isn't that I'm a pixel peeper or, I'm a fanatic to detail.
Mm-hmm.
But pay attention to absolutely everything on your canvas. A painter has to pay attention because they're the ones that put it on the canvas, right? So that's intentional. So I try to get photographers to be that intentional and realize we have phenomenal tools to make our painting exactly the way we want it.
And I would argue that starts with fieldcraft and image capture and being diligent about how you frame things up and compose in the field.
Yes, that's true. And I'm going to kind of jump a little bit. I wrote I did a Facebook post. We're very familiar with Ansel Adams, pre-visualization, and I saw what I wanted to do when I was looking there. Back in those days, the negative, and then you get in the darkroom, you have to develop negative, and then they have to make print. So what I wrote in this Facebook article was the notion that yes, it's true we can see at the time of capture what we might want to do with it. But my point was that between the time we capture it and the time we render it could be a day, a week, a month, in my case, a year or years. We dig up a file from 2 years ago from a photo shoot, and I've gotten some of my best images, retrievals from files that I looked at, and I go, how in the hell did I not process? This is great. And it goes to my point is we're not the same person, artist, today that we were when we took the picture. He said every picture we take reflects everyone we know, every book we've ever read, every piece of music. You've heard that. Okay, well, what he's describing is our state of consciousness. All those things he mentioned are elements of our state of consciousness. So what I'm saying is when we take a picture, between the time we take the picture and we render it, we're not the same people that we were. We've grown. Our state of consciousness, we've met new people, things have changed. So we're not the same. So our art, however slightly it's changed, it's still changed. So when we finally render that image, however long between the capture and the rendering, we may well see new things that we didn't see at the time of capture. And I'm amazed when I pull out an image and start working on it. I look at it and I go, oh my God, I didn't even see that. I saw the big picture, and what I really loved were these trees and the bark and the color contrast. It was but then I look at this picture and I go, oh well, that was cool, but look at this little bush right here. It's exquisite. But intuitively, the whole picture worked for me. But a lot of the details, some of the details, I just kind of didn't even see.
For sure.
So I was much more aware at the time of rendering than I was at capture, which is maybe not a good admission to have. So that's what happens between the time we take a picture and we render it. We're not the same person. However slightly we may be different, we're still not the same person. And that's the way it should be. As I wrote in one of my books, life that is not growing is life that is dying.
Well, let's talk about spirituality. You had mentioned that that's something that you're really interested in talking about. For you, what role does spirituality play in artistic expression?
Well, it's everything. That's like saying, what part does sound have to do with a violin or a trumpet? It's everything. What the sound that you produce is the music that you're creating. That's everything. So spirituality is our awareness and expression of our human essence. And that's where art is the expression of the human experience. They're one and the same. I came across a really interesting quote by an artist I'd never heard of before. So really, to me, the only purpose in photography is discovery of our spiritual self. That's what it's about. So there's an artist named Richard Tuttle. So here's a quote he wrote about spirituality. What I want more than anything is a definition of spirituality that is trustworthy. Indeed, and to be so, it must necessarily extend beyond a focus on the self to a sense of our embeddedness in the larger context, the exquisitely dynamic interrelatedness of our existence, the vibratory flux of the subtle realms of the material world, and the ultimate creativity of the universe. The cosmos is infused with an unfolding dynamic of becoming and a unitive dimension of being. Spirituality is the awareness of and engagement with the unity of those dynamics. That kind of nails it. Spirituality is not religion. Spirituality.
Right. I feel like that's where a lot of people have a disconnection with the word because it's so often connotated with the religious belief system. And even for someone like me who's an atheist,
Uh-huh.
I've often shied away from using that word just because of that connection. But I think to your point, I see myself as a spiritual person, especially as it relates to my time that I spend in nature and things like that. So I think it it's important to disconnect those two systems.
Right. Well, and that's what I do. I simply say spirituality is source. And source is, you can call it God, you can call it the universe, you can call it the all it is. Source to me is that energetic source from which we all spring as particles of reality. And I'm a huge student of quantum physics, and the real interesting thing is that there's a new branch of quantum physics called biocentrism, and they finally come down to what the great spiritual masters have said for all time. And quantum physics hold that there's life is basically pure light energy in the form of wave or particle. So if the universe is fundamentally made of energy, what they have come up with, which I totally agree, is that the energy in the universe is eternal. Well, there you go. There was no beginning, there is no end. And what I pointed out in an article I wrote is that the Western cultures of which we are part are so used to the concept of linear time. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. Most indigenous cultures on the planet don't have a linear concept. They have a concept of eternity, which is hard to wrap your head around. And Einstein said it best: time is an illusion, albeit a very convincing one. So, relative to spirituality, I just say spirituality has nothing to do with religion and texts, and because that has more to do with politics and control of resources for the most part. I mean, so anyway, when I talk to people about spirituality, I say, please be free to not define it. Just feel it, express it. Just be who you are, find who you are. And the great thing about art, that's what it's about. It's discovering who we are.
So what do you think is the best way for us as photographers to connect our spirituality to the work that we're creating through our photographs?
I mean, how to think about spirituality when we photograph?
Or how to connect spirituality with the final image?
Well, there is no separation between spirituality and our work. Our work is an expression of our spirituality. I had surgery for prostate cancer 24 years ago, and in the process of healing, I wrote some articles. The one thing I said is that a popular notion in medicine is all the rage now is the concept of the mind-body connection. And my experience, and I think a lot of people will understand this, there's no connection between the mind and the body because they're not separate. You can't connect things that are already connected. I guess what I'm trying to convey is, let's not think of spirituality and our work as two separate things. I would say our work is an outflow of our spirituality. In the same way that a creek, a river, is an outflow from a pond or a lake higher elevation, that lake drains down the mountainside. So I think of the creek or the river running down the mountain. To me, that's not separate from its source. It's all a part of. So, and the reason I emphasize this, and it goes to mindfulness, is when we're in the landscape, to allow ourselves to have this, to know that we are not separate from the landscape. I'll tell you briefly a story of something that happened to me. And I put this in the Guide to Photographing the Art of Nature book. And I didn't know how many people would look at that and, boy, this guy's off his rocker. Anyway, hospital complex in Seattle on First Hill. And parked, and she took the X-rays in and saw some doctors. So I'm parked and I'm looking from this vantage, what a phenomenal view of downtown Seattle, all the buildings and Puget Sound in the background. And though there was cloud cover, if they weren't there, you could see the Olympic Mountains. Just stunning view. And it was a typical gray November day, just kind of depressing. And so I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the buildings in downtown Seattle, and all of a sudden, like in a sci-fi movie where the subject you're looking at kind of zooms in, like in that poltergeist hallway scene. So what I was looking at downtown just started, the distance was closing and closing. And pretty soon, and this sounds crazy, I got the incredible sensation that the buildings and I were one. I was brick, I was glass, I was steel, I was everything that building was. We were not separate. We were one and the same material and matter. And I experienced it, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds, 15, and then it just kind of went away.
And this was before Washington legalized marijuana.
This, no drugs were involved in this. No. So, I consulted some people who were, I'll just call it, very spiritual. And what they told me said, this is how you learn the reality. And whether it was self-generated or some, I don't know, guardian angels or whatever you want to call it, you experienced a state of consciousness where you realize the unity of all things. Emerson said the same thing. The seer and the seen are one and the same. So that's what I learned from that. So in answer to your question about spirituality and how you apply it, it's something I don't think you apply, you just let it express itself. As what we call get better, we look at our images and go, oh God, my images are getting better. That's because who you are is finding its way into visual form.
And I think that's more along the lines of the question I was asking, is because I feel like you said, we notice that our work gets better over time. And I think the reason for that is there's multiple reasons, but one of them, like you say, is that we're allowing more of who we are to seep into our photography. And there's images that I've created, for sure, looking back in time, where that connection to spirituality was not present in the image, or at least it wasn't to the same degree as it is maybe would be today. And so that's kind of more what the genesis of my question is in terms of like, how do we get more onto that path of being a conduit of our spiritual existence as photographers and getting that into our photographs, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, if one wants to introduce the concept of God or source in a more personified way, one could say art is expression of the human experience in whatever form it may take, and it's God's or source's way of coming to know itself, and through our visual, musical, literary, art, and cultural traditions finds its voice. So, in other words, God comes to know itself, himself, herself, through our life experience. We express all possibility. Well, each one of us expresses possibilities that who we are, but taken in the totality, all life on the planet and all life in the universe, it's an unfolding of Source and Source's journey to understand what it's created, if that makes sense.
It does.
It kind of sounds out there, but to me, all the pieces of that puzzle fit really nicely.
Well, maybe this is an opportunity for us to get a little bit less conceptual and more practical, if you will.
Sure.
So I know that you've written a lot about various principles of composition and things of that nature in your books. Tell me about your thoughts on composition and what your approach to it is.
Well, first of all, I would say read as many books on composition as you can. My foundation was Freeman Patterson's book, The Art of State. That was my foundational. And if one reads nothing more than that book, you got a good start on the basics of composition and how to use color and composition and line and form and shape, texture, and so on and so forth. So familiarize yourself with all those concepts intellectually, technically, and then apply them when they work. And what I say is break them whenever possible. Everybody talks about the rule of thirds, and I don't pay attention to that stuff anymore. But we have to start there, okay? And over time, composition becomes intuitive. Becomes I don't even think about it anymore. And sometimes, I get the picture back and I go, "Did you pay attention, Bruce? Pay attention." So yeah, we all do that, and I go, it's like this. Like I say, I bring back a picture and the tree was beautiful, but I didn't notice this bush over here. Well, same thing with composition. Oh my God, what was I thinking? Now, that said, and this is an important point about the discussion of composition, is that some photographer, I read a quote of his, I don't know who it was, he said in a quote, he said, "I've never seen a photograph that didn't look better cropped." And I thought, oh, well, okay. And so I'll be darned if in the last couple of years, I've taken the crop tool and I have cropped and cropped. By the time I get done, I hit, the history button to opened image the way it was when I opened it up, and then to the final crop. And I almost invariably go, wow, that looks, I have intensified that picture. I have made it so much more expressive. It tells the story so much better. Because before, there's so much as extreme. Yeah, it was a good composition and, everything was good, it was balanced. But by cropping it down, it just intensified the expression. So
Yeah.
without getting into specifics of composition, I just say learn the rules, look at other people's work, and then go crazy with the crop tool. What's interesting, I shouldn't admit this, but yeah, I see a lot of great photographs on my Facebook thread, and I do this. I do this for my own education. Beautiful picture, and I look at it. So I drag it to my desktop and bring it to Photoshop, and I crop it. And sometimes I'll do a few tonal adjustments, and just the cropping, I go, I like it like this. And then I delete it. So, and because I do that to my own pictures, and, I'd never send it to the photographer. These guys and women are phenomenal, and I feel like I kind of overstepped my bounds. But
Oh no, it's funny you say that because just the other day I was getting my teeth cleaned at the dentist, and they have like one of those monitors on the wall that's got like Google Photos running through it, just random landscape photographs. And while I'm getting my teeth cleaned, I'm looking at these photos and I'm like cropping them with my fingers, like, oh, this would look better, like I'm so I totally get it.
well, what's funny is, Charlie Kramer.
Yeah.
I took a digital class from Charlie and Bill Atkinson back in 2004. I was anytime I send an email to Charlie, which is infrequent, but I always remind him he's my digital mentor, and forever grateful for that class because I learned so much. Even though I only remembered 10 things from Photoshop, those 10 things alone just blasted the quality of my images forward. Anyway, what he does, he came up, and Ansel Adams, had a card,
Yeah. He calls it
card, and
the
they
the
held it up.
Kramer framer.
Yeah. So, and I saw a video with Charlie and Kevin Raber on location in the coast, and Charlie was doing this, and I giggled because I've always had my own version of I just go like this.
Yeah, I was gonna say we have fingers.
Yeah, we're fingers, and you can, the card's not adjustable. Your fingers are, so it's kind of interesting. And with the Zoom, which I use, you can kind of do that, but still, you're going to end up cropping. It's rare that I'll output an image exactly the way it is. So composition, without getting into specifics, just let it learn the rules, practice, look at other photographers, see how they render things, and then just let it happen. I'll leave you with this on composition. It's not that difficult. People are taught that it takes years and years. We are born from the moment we open our eyes. We are composing from the day we're born. We're natural born composers. So the only difference between what we're doing as an infant or a child or just a human being in composition in every day is in photography or art. That's a very specific type or context for composing things. But we have the tools and they're inherent. So don't think of composition as something excruciatingly difficult to learn. It isn't. Learn the basics, read, look at other photographers, and then look at your pictures, and don't be afraid to crop. And when you get good at cropping and tightening your pictures, then the next time going forth, when you conceive of a scene, you'll be able to see it better because you've been cropping your pictures and you've been tightening your vision, and your ability to see will be that much sharper, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I'm curious what your thoughts are on some of the more basic principles and visual components that we should be thinking about in terms of creating great landscape images.
In what respects? What other elements are important?
What are some of the more what are some visual components that we should not overlook?
Well, light, obviously. I think one of the most important things is to understand what you can or cannot do with the scene with the given light. There's somebody wrote a book. There's no such thing as bad light. There's only poor misconceptions of what to photograph with the given light. In other words, people go, "Oh, it's a sunny day. It's great. Let's go out and photograph," and then they're shooting some fall colors or something, and they get these beautiful, wonderful colors, but they also get these incredibly deep black shadows, which there's the wonderful details and tonal gradations in there exist. You don't see. So if you go out and shoot on a sunny day, know what the light's going to do and how it's going to do it, and so use that for your subject matter. That said, what I most often do, I shoot grand scenics when it's sunny and autumn colors. I don't get me wrong, I do that. I prefer overcast to some extent. So what I do if it's a sunny day and there I am, I often go right to find water or reflective surfaces that are in shadow, like in a canyon. This is really easy in the Southwest, and you know this. You're in a canyon, and half the canyon's in shade, and the other half, the canyon walls are just gloriously lit up with sun. And so that shaded area, if there's water, has these beautiful reflections. But even on the shaded side, the walls that are in shade are so beautifully lit up by the reflected light from the other side of the canyon, and all the things that you can get given that. So be cognizant what you can and can and cannot do with the light that is present, I think is one of the most important things.
I totally agree. All right, well, let's talk a little about dynamic tension. What is it, and why should we put effort into using it in our photographs?
Well, I would say it's everything.
You already said spirituality is everything, Bruce.
Well, we use visual tension as as a way to express our unfolding spirituality. How's
Well,
that?
good save, good save.
So, visual tension is what brings life to an image. I mean, it's the substance. I don't eat beef, but I'll just say it's the meat and potatoes of the image. Visual tension is literally the contrast between light, color, texture, pattern, metaphoric themes. You can actually have a couple of different metaphors going on in the same picture, which is interesting. And Freeman Patterson, I learned this fundamentally from Freeman Patterson's book, is he calls it dynamic tension, visual tension. So it's the contrast between. And when I see other photographers' works, and when I see my own, and I'm considering an image, and I pull it up out of RAW and I look at it, and I go, oh, I see what I was going for. It's too mono-expressive. In other words, there's not enough contrast of light, line, shape. Most often, it's a lack of color contrast.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is real easy, particularly and I use the example of images that one takes in the Southwest. You get a lot of images with warm and cool color contrast in the same image, and that's something that's so universal. Painters throughout history use those palettes, and the reason why is because the tension between a warm and cool color, depending on the hues, the variations, can be so powerful in an image. So if I pull up an image of mine or I see somebody else's and it just kind of doesn't do it for me, a lot of times there's just not enough tension, and a lot of times it has to do with little or no color contrast. So
Yeah, and I was thinking about one of my favorite uses of tension is with different shapes. So like I was thinking about this scene I photographed last year on the coast of Spain. There was all of these sharp rocks with these lines in just beneath the surface of the water. And then in this pool of water there's a round rock. And so you have all of these lines going diagonally and all of these sharp rocks that have triangular shapes, and then there's a circle. And for me, like, that was just it just slapped me right across the face. Like, this is tension, right? So I think, like you said, you can get it from shapes, you can get it from color, you can get it from placement of objects in the scene. So I think there's lots of different ways to achieve it.
Thank you. I couldn't have said it better. Let me throw this in, and it ties in some of the things we've already talked about. And in the concept of, in composition, everything matters. And so one of the things that I do if I pull up somebody else's work and I pull it into, it's a beautiful picture to start, but I look at it and think, this has more potential. So I pull it into Photoshop, and a lot of times what I do is I hit the shadow highlights button and let the shadows come up, and it just, boom, that alone can bring a picture to life. And I see so many beautiful pictures of these incredible photographers, but their pictures, ideas good, everything's good, it's just flat. It's almost lifeless to me because I know what it can be. So I hit that, boom, it just comes up. It's just full of life. Sometimes what I do is I'll take the lasso and I'll circle, like in your example of the rock made me think of this. There'll be a rock in the foreground, and there's rocks here, and then it goes off in the distance, and it's a beautiful sweeping picture. But it's there's no tonal or light contrast. So what I'll do is I'll lasso a particular area, like a beautiful rock in the foreground that's really not standing out, and I will do a tonal adjustment and just slide the highlight slider over a little, and all of a sudden that rock comes to life. It's just whoa. And then,
Right.
and maybe add a little black, but mostly just slide the highlight slider to the left and bring it out. And then when I do a before and after, it makes all the difference in the world. So you can create wonderful contrast in an image by your tonal adjustments and selecting different parts. But what I almost always do is the first thing I do when I open it up and pull up shadow highlights and see what that does, and then I adjust that, and I usually to some degree, and then I get off to other things like cropping and cloning out distracting details. So the visual tension fundamentally springs from contrast of all the elements that make up visual art: line, shape, texture, pattern, theme, metaphors, light. It's the contrast. That's what gives it life. Let me bring in a musical example. So you have a violin section, first violin players in an orchestra. Let's say there's 5 of them, and they're all playing the same part. The notes are the same. They're all playing together. But the interesting thing is, although they're all technically in tune, they are vibrationally slightly dissonant, which is to say, all 5 of them, their vibrational frequency of their notes is ever so slightly different from everybody else's. And so what happens is you create what were called overtones. If you remember the computer synthesizer versions of Switched on Bach, and it was computer music, it was computer performance of Bach. And the thing that you notice about it is that it's just perfect, but it's sterile. And the reason it's sterile is because there's no vibrational dissonance in anything. But when you have 5 violin players, or the whole orchestra is in tune, but vibrationally you have 100 different vibrational frequencies for every note that they play. And so rather than like a computer, it's just like that. With a group, you build up a body of vibrational frequencies, and that gives it body, gives it essence. That's what visual tension does. Now you can have a picture it's really monochromatic, and it's just like 2 colors and gradations of hues, and maybe like a dune, and then there's just the very slightest edge of the dune that goes through it, which makes it a very minimalist picture, and the contrast is very low, it's very subtle, but that's what makes the picture. There's got to be some tension, however mute, for that picture to have life and expression.
Makes sense. Well, Bruce, we're running out of time, and I wanted to ask you a couple more questions. So
Sure.
Tell us about your new ebook.
Well, my new ebook tentatively is going to be called A Guide to Photographing the Art of Nature, Revised Edition.
Gotcha.
That was, so I have so much more to say now than I did 30 years ago, thankfully. My state of consciousness has evolved. I'm not the same person today I was then, thank God. So do the same thing. I'm envisioning kind of doing something I think will be interesting. Creating it as an ebook. It'll have expansive essays on different subjects. And then I'm going to present the images as you would say that in a coffee table book, like gallery, like left page is the image, and then there's a related image across. So to view, but then what I'm going to create is that you click on that image, and it it takes you to another part of the book where there's the image, and then I write the essay about how I took the picture, what concepts of composition or light or whatever went into that. So it's very much a how-to, but it's conceptual. And then I was thinking, I always loved to do a print book, so I thought what I could do is a print version of that, where I don't waste paper doing the pictures with the essays. I'd leave that for the e-version. So the print version will be the same images, many of the same thematic essays, but without the how-to. It's more of a presentational coffee book. But I'll offer them. You can buy the ebook all by itself if you want. But I encourage people, if you buy the coffee table book, you automatically get the ebook because they're companion products.
That's very similar to what we've done with the Natural Landscape Awards books. We have the awards books, which are photos and text, but then we have an extended PDF that accompanies the book that has, for each image in the book, it has a picture of the photographer and then their explanation of what went into creating the image, including settings and equipment and things like that. So I think that's a really good idea because that's what we did too.
Yeah. Well, it's you got to get in today's photography world. You got to get creative. You got to get imaginative. I hate the term, but don't even think outside the box because there is no box. So just let her rip.
Make your own box.
Yeah, I mean, have no borders, have no boxes to break out of, have nothing to break out of. Just let your mind flow. But like you, I'm sure my best ideas, they do not come when I'm trying to think of something great. My best ideas is when I'm out for a walk, and I just literally space out. I don't think about anything. I'm walking, it's autumn, and I look up, and I'm looking at how the branches on this trail overlap and create this mosaic of colors, and I'm just mesmerized. And then 10 minutes down the trail, I go, wow, where was I? And more often than not, I'll get what I think was a really good quote. And I did get a good quote in that experience, and it's one I put in my book about creativity, and it goes like, don't chase an idea, sit quietly in your mind and let it find you. For creativity emerges from imagination in the moments between thoughts. So it's very, in a meditative state where we've emptied our mind of everything. Empty your mind and just be where you are, see what you see, and feel what you're experiencing. And that's where ideas and creativity comes from. To me, it's not purposeful thinking. It's letting go of thoughts.
I agree. All right, Bruce, who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are a couple of people that we should get to know?
Well, Mark Gardner. Mark's a friend and I, we got to be friends a couple of years ago. He lived on San Juan Island and moved here to Anacortes and emailed me, and we got together and exchanged books. And he's an interesting guy. He's very talented. He actually, for career, he was in sales. So he created a sales consulting seminar that he did with his brother. But before that, he actually did a how-to book with Art Wolf, which is very interesting. So anyway, he is a very good landscape photographer, and he's a fabulous portrait photographer, does really good work. So he would be interesting to talk to because he is traveling around a lot now with his wife and their camper and going to all these great places and creating all this great work, but he still does portraiture. So he would give you a really interesting perspective. And to the point, when I talk to young people today that are photographers, I meet them out on the beach and I tell them what I do. And so I said, if you're going to get into photography and you want to do nature, and what you should really do is think about having a commercial component to your photography. And if I were to start over, what I would do would learn how to be a really good portrait photographer, because that works really well with nature photography. So, so Mark's great. Jim, I haven't seen or talked to for years. He was a commercial fisherman for years, and then he got into photography, and he did art shows, and he did really beautiful artistic abstracts of sides of buildings, and really imaginative stuff. And that circuit's a difficult thing to do. So he and his wife's graphic designer, and they got into doing European photo tours. And they've been doing that, I don't know, 5-6 years, and I get their letter.
Just real quick, this is Jim Nielsen.
This is Jim Nielsen, yeah. And
Yeah.
they are just kicking it. And I'm thinking, boy, they are living the life of Riley, going to all these great places, wine, food, beautiful places to photograph. And from what I gather, they get so much repeat business. People just want to go every year to a different place with them. So great photographer, great business model. So very definitely he would be a great podcast guest along with Mark.
All right, Bruce, thank you. That was awesome. And I can't wait to check out your new ebook. And where can people go to learn more about you and what you do?
They can go to my site, which is The Fine Art of Living. Just a brief plug. As soon as we get off, I am going to launch on my Facebook a brand new product for pre-order. It's Ansel Adams has that large format wall calendar that's sold for 40 years. Anyway, I've created a large format, frameable calendar and tutorial called A Guide to Photographing the Art of Nature. And it's 12 images, tutorial information, frameable images of really nice size. So I'm launching that today, and it's for pre-order and it'll be ready for shipping in August. So if anyone's interested, take a look, see what you think.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome, Bruce. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Thanks again. I really appreciate the time you took to come join us today.
My pleasure, and thanks again for what you do. We'd all be poor without you.
Oh, thanks.
Well, thank you to Bruce for the enlightening conversation. It was great to hear about your journey and your thought processes relating to photography as art. Keep up the great work, sir. Do you have thoughts relating to what we discussed this week that you're dying to share? I'd love to hear your takes on our Patreon page. Each week, I publish the episode with thought-provoking questions attached for you to think about and respond to. It's worth noting that these Patreon episodes first come out months in advance for our Patreon supporters, but joining in on the discussions is totally free. Just go to patreon.com/fstopandlisten and find this episode to engage in the conversation. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.